Hey there, fellow classic comic collectors. As always, I'm Scott Harris King, and today I thought, why don't we talk about Avengers number 8? Before we get to talking about my copy of Avengers number 8 and Avengers 8 in general, just a couple things quick about the channel here. I mentioned in a previous video, I am still going to be working on the trading challenge. I haven't forgotten the trading challenge. I've got all the books here. I've got the lists. I'm ready to go with round 3. This Kickstarter I'm in the middle of is taking just so much time and effort. It's much harder to make comics than it is to buy them. So it's just taking up a lot of time, and I just don't have the energy that I need to devote to the trading challenge right now. But once this is over, a week or two, I'm going to have the next round of the trading challenge up. We can get that back up and running. It's a long-term plan for me, so stay tuned. We're definitely going to keep going forward with that. The other thing is this video, I was planning on putting this up on Monday. Before I started my Kickstarter, I recorded a whole bunch of videos in advance so that I wouldn't have to record them during it because I knew how crazy it was going to be. And I ended up one video short of getting through the whole thing. And so I was going to do this on Monday, and I just got swamped with more Kickstarter stuff. So that's why I moved the interview with Ryan Mendoza, the artist of Miskatonic High, to Monday. I was originally going to put that up today. So I just swapped them around. Last thing about the Kickstarter, I promise, is that Monday, my Kickstarter ends. I am doing a live stream here. We're going to count down the last minutes of the Kickstarter, see if we, get a big surge at the end or the other way around. I've had a number of people, as we get closer to the end, suddenly realize, oh, they might have to actually pay for this thing. So I've been losing a bunch of backers, but it's just part of the deal. Anyway, anyone who wants to drop in, that's 9 o'clock on Eastern Time, Monday night, we'll be doing the Kickstarter closeout party to close out Cthulhu versus Uncle Sam. So join us for that, and bring your party hats. Any questions? We can talk about anything at all that you want to. Like Avengers number 8. So let's get into it. Avengers number 8. The last year and a half, comic collecting has been absolutely bonkers crazy. At the beginning of 2020, I basically had one comic in my collection that was worth over $1,000, worth a couple thousand. It was my Avengers number 1, of course. And I had a number of books that were, sniffing around 1,000, a handful of those. But just a handful, like not a lot. Now, fast forward a year and a half later, all of a sudden I've got like multiple books in my collection that are worth $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 each. And it's insane. I had to significantly raise my insurance policy, get out the bank vault to hide away all my goodies. And but it's like from like 1 month to the next, it's just crazy. Some of those books make sense. I paid a lot for the Albedo number 2. I did a video about that when I bought it. I paid a lot to begin with. It's already doubled in price in the last year, which is insane. But obviously I paid a lot to start with for that one. Other books that have gone crazy in my collection, like Strange Tales 110, makes sense. Marvel Spotlight number 5, okay, makes sense. But the book in my collection that's gone the absolute craziest, that I never would have expected, is this one right here. It's Avengers number 8, the first appearance of Kang the Conqueror. Now, this book has a special meaning to me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about my copy here, and then we'll talk about the book in general. I've told some of the story already on my Avengers 1 to 100 Complete Run Madness video, but I'll tell it again if you don't want to sit through an hour and a half of that. Kang's my favorite supervillain. Avengers is my favorite superhero title. And Kang has always been my favorite supervillain. I love Kang. In all the comics, Kang's my favorite. There have been so many great Kang stories. Kurt Busiek in particular has done some amazing Kang stories. So I love Kang. So Kang, this first appearance of Avengers 8, important book for me personally. This is the 3rd copy of Avengers 8 that I've owned. The first copy that I got was like horribly miscut. The top of the book was like an inch wider than the bottom, so it looked like a weird wedge. It was also really beat up. I upgraded from that to another copy that was at least cut correctly, but it was also really beat up. And then I ended up with this copy. Now, this is one of my big trades. You know, I love the trades. The trading challenge is all built around how much I love doing trading. And basically what happened was way back in the day, 1989, right around the time Batmania was striking because of the Tim Burton Batman movie, was way up in Presque Isle, Maine, which is up there. And there was a comic book store, and I went there and I found a really nice high-grade copy of Batman 171, the first Silver Age Riddler, and I paid $20 for it. And I ended up trading that for then it blew up in price. That was one of my speculation books. I did really well on it. It was a really nice copy. It was probably structurally around an 8.5 or a 9. It did have some discoloration from like some sunspots on it. I traded that for an Amazing Spider-Man 39 in probably a 7.5, and an Amazing Spider-Man 40 in probably a 9.2, maybe better. It was one of the maybe the nicest Silver Age book I've ever had. And I eventually was at a show and I traded those two books to upgrade my Avengers collection. The books I got was an Avengers 7, which is being advertised at around a 7. It's actually more like a 5 or 5.5. It's got a number of sort of like defects that you don't notice right away, but the accumulation of them. And this, Avengers number 8, high grade copy of Avengers 8. Now, really nice copy. When I first joined the CGC forums, for those of you who are on the CGC forums, they have a board there which is please grade my book, where you do scans of the book and people look at the scans. Of course, you can't tell the page quality, you can't tell any possible interior defects, but based on the scans and the way the book sits and looks, the consensus was that my copy is about an 8.0. So that's how I got my copy of Avengers number 8, which I've just shown you here. And at the time, I was definitely taking a loss on that trade. You know, Spider-Man 39 and 40, obviously classic issues, really high-grade copies. And I was basically downgrading from key Spider-Man issues to non-key Avengers issues. And I was also downgrading in the grades, right? Because the Spider-Man 39 was a 7.5, the Avengers 7 was only a 5.5. The Spider-Man 40 was like a 9.2, the Avengers 8 is an 8.0, right? Or so. So, I mean, I was taking a hit on that, but Avengers is my favorite title. My copies of 7 and 8 were really trashed, so a significant upgrade in terms of my Avengers collection, and I was happy with it. You know, I was happy with it. These are books that I was planning on keeping in my collection permanently, and that's been the case, because here we are 30 years later, and I'm doing a YouTube video about it because all of a sudden this book has gone so crazy that it's gone from being a book that I love because I'm a huge fan of Kang, but 3 years ago this was like a $250 book in this condition. And now I don't even know how much. Like if I got this CGC'd, which I'm not gonna do because I don't want to get into it, but I have some issues with stuff CGC is doing right now. If this came back a CGC 8.0, which I think it has a good chance at, holy smokes, it could be the most valuable comic in my collection, which is, crazy. I have an Avengers 1 that's signed by Stan Lee, but that's only a 3.0, and this book has gotten so hot that it's just gone from nothing to like the hottest book in the Silver Age collecting. So I'm flabbergasted. It's great. I'm still not planning on getting rid of it. I have considered potentially downgrading. It's really tempting, to be like, I'll trade you my 8.0 Avengers 8 for a 4.0 and $3,000 cash or something like that. I mean, it's tempting, but I haven't done that yet, and it's just amazing. I mean, the crazy thing is, now it's hard to tell how the speculator, this boom, because it's not just speculator. This big, I've done a whole video about this, but this boom we're in right now, I think it's slowing down some. I don't see a really much of a regression happening, but I think the burst is slowing down. It's hard to tell how things are going to go. But in terms of this book, I think it's going to continue to go up. And I don't think we're going to see a crash. And here's where I'm going to have to start to talk about why the book is really taking off. This is going to involve some spoilers and why I don't think it's going anywhere. So this is some MCU spoilers for upcoming Phase 5 stuff, Phase 4 stuff, and some of the TV shows. So if you don't want to be spoiled in that stuff, I totally get it. I hate spoilers and avoid them at all costs. But I need to talk about them in order to really talk about this book. Okay, I'm assuming if you're still with me that you're okay with the spoilers. But Kang is being set up to be the big villain in the MCU. And we've known that for a little while. There's been hints and stuff, and we've known that with the multiverse and the time travel stuff, even as far back as Avengers Endgame, when they did the time travel stuff and we ended up getting a Thanos from another universe, my reaction in the theater was, well, that's Kang stuff. What, like, why you're bringing in Kang stuff? And at the time I was really disappointed because it felt like, now they can't really use Kang because they already did the Kang stuff. I didn't realize that they were actually setting up the Kang stuff. And so we know now that Kang is going to be in Ant-Man 3. But we also know that basically the whole next giant thing that everything is building towards is all about Kang. So just like the first 3 phases of the MCU were all building towards Avengers Endgame and the showdown with Thanos, and you had Thanos seeded in all these movies throughout, that's what's happening now with Kang, where we were going to have the explosion of the multiverse and all these alternate universes interacting with each other, and the ultimate end game for this is that each of those universes has some version of Kang in it, and there's going to be a huge Kang war between the Council of Kangs that's going to pit universe versus universe. Now, for those of you who haven't seen Loki, well, you probably should have stopped watching when I told you I was going to spoil everything. But the last episode of Loki had me just about through the ceiling. When you get to episode 5, it's a 6-episode series. Episode 5, I spoiled the whole thing for my wife accidentally because we were watching episode 5, and at the end of the episode, they went to this place that's the end of time, and time works differently there, and there's all these sort of mists and different versions of people that have been like shanghaied there, and then at the end the mists part and you see this weird castle through the mist. And I told my wife, I said, man, this really reminds me of the story in Avengers 267 to 269 with the Council of Kangs and Immortus. And I said, I don't know what they're going to have in this castle when we get to them in episode 6. But the coolest thing they could do, what I would do if I was doing it, is they've been hyping the He Who Remains, the person that created the Time Variance Authority, the last being alive at the end of time in the comics. He Who Remains is supposed to be the person that's in this citadel. And I was like, if I was them, I would combine Immortus and He Who Remains into one character, because this looks like all Immortus stuff. All the stuff in episode 5. This looks like Limbo. It very much acts like Limbo and looks like Limbo, and that looks like Immortus's castle from that storyline, his fortress in Limbo. And I'm like, if I was them, I would have He Who Remains actually be Immortus. And holy smokes, they actually did it. Now they've come out in the press and been like, well, technically it's not Immortus. We're still calling him He Who Remains. And I've seen some speculation that they're keeping the door open to have Immortus himself in one of the later movies, because what happens in the last episode of Loki is it's He Who Remains is a version of Kang, and he basically is like, there was this time war between the council of all the Kangs, and it led to the destruction of everything. And so to save the multiverse, to save the universe, to save our timeline, He Who Remains destroyed all the other timelines. And he has the time variance authority, making sure that anytime there's any kind of variance from the timeline that would create an alternate universe, they go in and they destroy that immediately and nip it in the bud and stop a new timeline from happening, because he's like, if we get any alternate universes, it's going to lead to alternate Kangs in the 31st century, and those alternate Kangs are eventually going to start another Kang war. We'll be right back to where we were, and the Kangs fighting each other are going to destroy everything. And then he's like, so whatever you do, don't kill me. So of course he gets killed, and it leads to the timeline exploding and setting that up. And we know that there's all this stuff with the multiverse that's already in play. We know that Ant-Man is going to be about the multiverse. We know that Doctor Strange is going to be about the multiverse. We know that the new Spider-Man movie coming out of Christmas, it's all about the multiverse. They're all about the multiverse, and we're going to be seeing alternate versions of characters, or alternate Spider-Men coming over from other movies. We're going to be seeing all these alternate universes clashing, and it's going to be all fun and games. But we know from Loki that what it's setting up is we're going to be seeing all these different versions of Kang in these stories too. We're going to see Kang himself, most importantly. We'll probably see Immortus. We'll probably see Rama-Tut. We'll probably see the Scarlet Centurion. And Phase 4 is just going to be the setup of this stuff, because Phase 4 is where they're introducing new characters, and they're introducing the idea of the multiverse. And I think we're probably not going to see the end of the Kang stuff until the end of Phase 6. I think it's going to go on just as long as the Thanos stuff that does. I think we're looking at 10 years of movies all about the multiverse setting up Kang. And in Loki, they specifically made Kang way more deadly and dangerous than Thanos. Like, they very purposely did that, because there's a sequence in the Time Variance Authorities where Loki finds all of these Infinity Stones. There's like hundreds of them, because they have no power where the Time Variance Authority is, because it's outside of time. And for them, it's Thanos and the Infinity Stones and all that stuff was just one of the things that happens on the timeline. And they've destroyed infinite number of other timelines with infinite number of variants with infinite number of Thanoses. And so for them, Thanos is just nothing, because the real power, the ultimate power in all of existence, is He Who Remains, is Kang. And so they basically just were like, you think that the stuff in those other movies was something? We're going to dwarf all of that. And the stuff with Kang is going to make Thanos look like a 2-year-old, right? So that brings us back to the whole reason I'm talking about this. It's Avengers number 8. And I can't believe I'm saying this, but as insane as the price rise on this has been, where this book is now worth 10 times as much as it was a year and a half ago or 2 years ago, and it's still going up, I think it's going to keep going up, because, when we have these books that are being speculated on for movies, the speculation is, well, maybe it'll be popular and important, and then if it's not, like the first appearance of Mandarin after Iron Man 3, it drops like a rock, right? But we know that's not going to happen, because we've already seen Kang in the end of Loki, and it was awesome. And the majority of fans seem to have thought it was awesome. and it's just going to build from there. And I think that 10 years from now, the way the general public knows about Thanos, it's going to be like that with Kang. I think this book is here to stay. I think Kang is here to stay. Real question is, what are other first appearances of his different variations going to be? It was interesting to me that I saw all these reactions of people online, and they weren't like, oh, it's the first appearance, when Loki comes out on Loki. They weren't like, oh, it's He Who Remains. And they also weren't like, oh, it's Immortus. They were all like, it's Kang. And it seems to me, just very early on, that they're going to treat all the other versions of Kang as just being other versions of Kang, which is true in some cases, but not in other cases. Immortus to me is really a separate character, but I don't think we're going to see a huge boost in the prices of the other first appearances. You will get some, and it's going to depend on how key they are in the storylines in the future. No pun intended. But I was hoping, since I have a really nice Avengers 10 as well, that after Immortus basically, the He Who Remains, it was Immortus. He was wearing the Immortus outfit, except without the hat. I was hoping that would suddenly jump in price, and it has gone up, but not like Avengers 8. And so I don't think, even though Fantastic Four 19, the first Arama Tut, even though that predates Avengers 8, I think Avengers 8 is still going to be the Kang key to have. Now, Fantastic Four 19 is already very expensive because of the connection with Kang, and because it's a much earlier Marvel, it's definitely harder to find. So, that's going to see some increases too. But I think Avengers 8 is the one to have. One to look out for that you can still get cheap, I think. Cheap. Is sleeper book might be Avengers Annual number 2. All-time great story. All-time great cover by John Buscema, with the original Avengers fighting the current Avengers, which is around it takes place between issues 56 and 57. Deals with an alternate universe where the Avengers are basically defeated, and the whole world is kind of defeated and co-opted by this time-traveling overlord by the name of the Scarlet Centurion, who we discover is Kang. He's an alternate version of Kang. Later stories, there's a different Scarlet Centurion where it's Kang's son, working with Kang, has taken on the Scarlet Centurion role. I don't know when they're going to introduce, or how they're going to introduce, or if they're going to introduce Scarlet Centurion, but it's an interesting twist on the character that I expect we'll see at some point, and it's got a fantastic classic cover that's a black cover. It's really hard to find a nice copy of Avengers Annual 2, so that might be something on your radar. We've seen big increases in books already with speculators and people going crazy about stuff like the Avengers storyline at 267 and 269, and it's justified because if you watch Loki, the plot, what ultimately turns out to be the plot of the show, is heavily based on that storyline, Avengers 267 to 269. But anyway, I've talked long enough about this. Let me show this off one more time. Out of nowhere, much to my shock, possibly the most expensive book that I own now. I think Avengers 1 is still worth a little bit more right now. I think my Albedo number 2 is also worth a little bit more, but they're in the same ballpark, which is absolutely bat poop nuts to me that this, of all things, has become the book. And it just goes to show what I always say: collect what you love. You'll never be disappointed if you buy something because you love it, and you'll be very pleasantly surprised when stuff like this happens, and a book you bought because you love it suddenly goes crazy because everyone else discovers how cool it is. Definitely not the first time that's happened to me, but this is a spectacular instance of it. Anyway, thanks very much for watching. I really appreciate it, and let me know what you think. Let me know what you think about Avengers 8, about Kang, about all the MCU stuff, about the speculating, whatever. And I'll see you next time.